Thank you. It's very exciting to be here. It's my first time in the Middle East. As Jad said, I've actually done a number of films to do with representations of the Middle East. But this is my first visit, so I'm very, very excited to be here. And what I hope to do is to put a few questions on the table for you to consider as you proceed through the week. I was glad I was here for the first session, just so we could see what the general ideas are, the general themes that we'll be dealing with. And what I want to try and do in the session now is I want to become a little bit more specific about how we proceed from those general concerns. And to really add some, what I think are vital terms to the debate. There's a couple of there was some media literacy on the way in. Some of you, I don't know if you came in from the Mayflower Hotel, the journey that I took, I saw this on the street, so I took a quick photograph. So there's already some media literacy happening in Beirut from some people. There's a couple of publications that will just refer you to where I talk about some of these things. The first one is with my colleague Justin Lewis. We did an article, this was in 1996, I think, called The Battle for Media Literacy. And there's another report that I did, and this report was prepared for the Ford Foundation in 2004 called Empowering Literacy, Media Education as a Democratic Imperative. Both of these are based upon the media literacy movements and debates in the United States. But I think they're relevant given how influential people are, how theorists in the United States are. Both of these articles I will give to Lubna to put on the blog, so you can download them from there, hopefully directly after the session. And also if you're interested, I also have my own website, and there's a lot of video and articles there as well that you can access for free and download. And I'm here all week. I'm doing 3 presentations. I'm doing one today, one Wednesday, and one on Friday. So you can certainly engage me in these issues beyond just the formal sessions that I'll be conducting. As I said, what I'd like to do today is to make a number of, and before I start, although I'm going to be speaking very specifically from my own experience, and I realize you can't just adapt from one situation to another. And so what I hope to do is to lay out some issues that you will be able to think about in relationship to your own specific situation, because it will be very different, obviously. So I'm not advocating a kind of, just to adopt this in some way, but to be able to adapt these, the theoretical points I'm making to your own specific context. And what I'd like to do today, as I said, is make a number of important theoretical distinctions, things that we should be paying attention to within the field of, we can call it media literacy. I actually prefer to call it media education. I think it gets to the issues that I want to deal with in a more specific way. And there's a series of, having said that, there are a series of vital choices to be made as we proceed with our work. And what I'll do is I'll highlight the choices that I've made in my own work. The very first distinction, and perhaps it's the most fundamental one. And when we had the discussion this morning, I think we heard this distinction as how we were talking about it. The very first distinction is the distinction in terms of the function of media literacy. Do we think of the audience as consumers, or do we think of them as citizens? And depending upon how you come at that, you will proceed very differently. You will proceed very differently. This is in the article I mentioned with Justin Lewis. This is the way we start off that article, and I'll just read to you this because I think it kind of makes clear I said I would say these are soft distinctions. They're not hard distinctions. They're soft distinctions within the field. But this is what we said. We said the argument we wish to make is, in essence, a simple one. Media literacy should be about helping people to become sophisticated citizens rather than sophisticated consumers. Mass media, in other words, should be understood as more than a collection of texts to be deconstructed and analyzed so that we can distinguish or choose between them. They should, we will argue, be analyzed as a set of institutions with particular social and economic structures, structures that are neither inevitable nor irreversible. Media education should certainly teach students to engage with media texts, but it should also, in our view, teach them to engage and challenge media institutions. Now, that already is separating the field in important ways, in that you're introducing issues to do with activism, with looking at media as things to struggle over, and as media as having a role to play in much broader structures. And so the terminology that I prefer to use, I mean, I think, again, I go back and forth, but my own preference is for the second of these, media literacy or media education. I would much prefer to talk about media education. I think this is more than just about literacy of messages. I think if you want to get to questions, the broader questions of power, the broader questions of institutions, the broader questions that we always have to think about in relationship to media. Again, I actually, if you hear me referring to media, that's a mistake. I actually almost never refer to media because I don't think saying the media tells us anything, because there are 100 different types of media. And so I think we have to, so mostly when I speak about media, if I make a mistake and slip into that, what I mean mostly when I talk about media is corporate media. Is media as businesses, corporate media which are controlled with a profit-making imperative. And the reason I talk about that is because that is the vast majority of media that exists in the world. And it certainly is the only kind of media that exists within the United States. There is almost no such thing as public media in the United States. There's supposed to be, but it disappeared a long time ago. And so the media, by their very definition in the United States, are corporate controlled. And that will obviously unless we take that into account, we will have no way of making sense of messages. Actually, the real question for me, and the distinction between these two things, between media literacy and media education, is why you're interested in media literacy. That would be the first question. Are you interested in media in particular? If you are, then I think you're interested in media literacy. Or in fact, are you interested in the role that media plays in much broader and wider cultural and social processes? And if you're interested in that broader role, then I think media education is the term that describes that. And I said these are choices to be made, and they're the choices, initial choices as to how you approach these things. The reason I'm interested in media is, I'm not really interested in media as such. I'm actually interested in politics. I'm interested in power. I'm interested in how the society is organized. I come to media studies through sociology. In fact, I still regard myself as a sociologist. I've ended up in media studies and the study of media because I think you cannot actually understand issues to do with power and to do with politics and to do with the structuring of the society without understanding media's role within that. So I've come to media in one sense as a secondary thing, not as an immediate thing because of the role that media play. Now, again, as I said, these distinctions that I'm making, I think are relatively soft distinctions. And I'm not really interested in policing the boundaries of media literacy. Media literacy as a field is too small for us to be arguing about and to say there's only one way of doing it. I think there could be many different ways of doing it, but I am going to, my approach to this has been less to engage in debates around these things and more to say I'm just going to do some kind of work. And I hope that work will be useful and will be a demonstration of what this kind of media education can do. Now, this distinction between media literacy and media education, let me just start off with one very prominent and influential person in media literacy who makes a very strong argument, and you saw her on she was here speaking last year. Name is Renee Hobbs, a friend of mine. We have, I said these are not hard arguments we have within this field. But the way she defines media literacy is very specifically around messages. It's very specifically around understanding messages. This is what she says. I don't want to misquote her. She says, at the heart of the media literacy movement is the open, questioning, reflecting, critical stance towards messages. Media literacy, and you'll have some of these terms we just came across in Jad's lecture. Media literacy is the process of accessing, critically analyzing media messages, and creating messages using media tools. The goal of media literacy is to promote autonomy through the development of analysis, reasoning, communication, and self-expression skills. Fine aims. If you were just to replace media, if you just to take out media part and just say literacy, it's actually a very, very standard way of thinking about liberal education and thinking about literacy in terms of writing. And there's nothing, and this argument just says, well, there is a new form of, we should expand literacy beyond just the written word, that it's now about the visual, it's about the audio as well, and there's a new modern language that we need to be able to understand. Again, I think these are fine aims, but I don't think they take us very far. I don't think they take us to the heart of why we should be studying media in a very serious way. It's essentially, as I said, it's essentially a liberal education approach for the modern age, and it's what I would say this is the dominant frame, and this has been the dominant frame in media education. Renee is a very important figure in media literacy field, and I think she wrote an article, I think it's about 20 years ago now, called The 7 Great Debates in Media Literacy. I would also refer you to, and again, it lays out some of the distinctions within the field of media literacy. But I think, without a doubt, the dominant frame in media literacy has been message-centered. That it's focused on, here are the messages, and here, how do we make sense of these messages? Now, in opposition to this, I want to suggest another way of thinking about these things. I think there are things that they will add onto it. I don't think they're in particular in opposition to it, but it's just coming at it from a different perspective, and that's from the perspective of media education. And the argument I want to make is both conceptual and historical. Now, one of the things in my teaching and in my writing that I consistently stress is the importance of asking the right questions and of correct starting points. Starting points to me are really very important because where you start will determine where you end up. And if you start in the wrong place, and if you ask the wrong question initially, you can spend a lifetime studying it, and it will tell you very little. You have to. I mean, you have to ask the right question. What is the right question? What's the correct starting point for understanding? Make no mistake, I'm actually interested in messages as well. I just don't think we should start there. I think we have to start somewhere else. Because texts, messages, are part of a much more complex social, economic, and cultural process. And I think we have to recognize, though, that broader structure, that broader system within which media messages are framed. There's a very influential cultural theorist. His name is Richard Johnson. He's a British cultural theorist. And I myself come out of, I actually don't consider myself coming out of media studies. I don't even really consider myself a sociologist. I consider myself coming out of the tradition of cultural studies, and especially the tradition of cultural studies that came from the University of Birmingham in England in the 1970s, and especially that connected with the work of Stuart Hall, who passed away a few months ago, very tragically. And so Richard Johnson is part of cultural studies, and he has this a very famous, what he calls the circuit of culture. And he says, if you're interested in cultural forms, if you're interested in text, well, he says there's a number of different stages to it. There's a number of different processes, or there's a circuit through which texts go, or through which culture goes. He starts off with production. Things are produced. People make things. They make texts. They make messages. And those are there's production, and then there are the texts themselves. Those texts are then read by people. And again, as Jad indicated today, they're not made sense of in any simple way. There are many different ways in which readers can make sense of texts. Actually, in one sense, difference is built into the human species. Because we know that the way in which we interact with text is a connection between, there's a text that's there, and there's what we bring to it as individuals. And given that every single human being that has ever lived has lived a unique life, then it is no surprise that our relationship to text, our relationship to messages will be different. That's just built in. For me, difference is actually not what's interesting. Difference is what is built into us as a human species. We are a symbolic species. We go with the way we understand the world through the mediation of culture. And culture is what our history is. That's our difference. So there's no wonder that we make sense of things in such different ways. And so my question actually on all this is, given that difference is built into the human species, why is it that so many people make the same meaning? And that can only be the result of intense work to make this message mean the same thing to large numbers of people. And so I'm interested in that process of how difference is suppressed so that sameness can be imposed there. And that's the work of power. That's the work of public relations. That's the work of advertising. That's the work of propaganda. It takes an immense amount of work to get past that difference. And I think the field actually has become obsessed with difference when it should actually be obsessed with sameness. When it should be actually obsessed with why there is so much that's similar in terms of how we interact with text. Readers then take those texts and they live in the world with those texts and the meanings those texts have created. And then as production goes through again, producers take account of how readers have interacted with text, how they've used them in the world, and then build that into. So that's the circuit of culture. It's actually, if you were to, there's a wonderful article that Richard Johnson has written. I don't have the photocopy of that, but it's called "What is Cultural Studies Anyway?" And this is where he lays out this. Actually, what he's doing is he's actually adapting this from Marx's work about the circuit of commodities and how commodities go through the process of production and circulation and distribution and exchange. Now the question is, if you're interested, the question is, where do you cut in here? Because where you start in this process, it's a complicated process. Where you start will determine the kinds of understandings you have with it. And I would say, looking at this, I would say, my starting point, especially, and I'll say within the context of the United States, which is where I've done the bulk of my work. Actually, it will be different in Europe, and I'm sure it will be different in the Arab world. I'm sure it will be different in the Arab, and so as I said, it's really, it's up to you to figure out how to adapt this. My starting point would actually not be texts. My starting point would not be messages. And the reason why it would not be messages is that, that messages actually have never been what's central to American media. That seems a very strange thing to say, but so hold on for 5 minutes and I will try and justify it. Messages have never been what mass media in the United States have been about. That's not been what media have produced in the United States. The major function of media in the United States, from about 1922 on, the major function of media in the United States is to deliver audiences to advertisers. That's the function. The function of media is to deliver an audience to an advertiser. Now within that, and in fact there is no media form that is free from this imperative. And so in the discussion that we had this morning, I mean, I was kind of keeping my eye open. The term advertising didn't come up very much, hardly at all. In fact, if you're interested, and I actually think globally it is going to become more and more important. You know, I've started with the United States, but this is a global phenomena. Advertising is the logic of media systems. And if you want to understand the messages that come out of that media system, then you have to understand the logic of advertising as its base. And you have to understand that, in fact, the major thing that American media have produced is not audiences. Sorry, it's not messages. They've never produced, let me go back to, let's look at television. Let's look at radio. Let's look at electronic media. When radio is first introduced into the United States, I want to be very specific. I don't think there is any kind of knowledge that is not specific. Whatever you want to look at, if you want to look at racism, there is no one thing, that there's no such thing as just racism. There are racisms that operate in different ways, and so you have to be specific from the general understanding. If you look at the development of radio in the United States, the first form of broadcasting, the very first thing that NBC sold, they were the first media corporation, the very first thing they sold were radio sets. That's what they controlled. They made radio sets, and they wanted to sell radio sets to people, and they wanted to make huge amounts of money. Why should people buy radio sets? Well, there had to be something for them to listen to. And so NBC set up radio stations around the country to make messages, to deliver messages that audiences would then listen to. That is, free programming was the bait for people to buy radio sets. The money, where did the money come? The money came from people handing over however much it was to buy a radio set. In fact, this never comes, the messages have always been a cost within the system. Within about 2 years, from about 1920 to about 1922, it switches. NBC's already sold a ton of radio sets. How else can you make money? Well, now the money comes from advertisers. And so from 1922, NBC starts to gather audiences together in enough numbers to be able to sell their attention to advertisers. and the money then comes from advertisers. So looking at American media, again, you'll notice I'm very specific. I haven't said just looking at media. I said looking at American media. Messages have never been the major thing that they've produced. They have a role to play. Right? They have a role to play in the major thing that they produce, but they've never been the actual thing. Therefore, if you want to understand American media, you want to understand it historically, you want to understand it in the contemporary situation, messages are the wrong place to start. They're not the wrong, I'm actually very interested in messages, right? I'm really interested in messages. After all, that's why I study media. I just don't think we should start there. I think and I'll give you more reasons. I just don't think that should be the starting point. The starting point should be somewhere else. We should always, no matter what situation, we should always start elsewhere. We should always start elsewhere. If messages are part of a propaganda system, if they're produced by governments, well, you have to start somewhere else then in terms of what the function of that message system, or also what the function of those messages are. By starting with messages, I think actually it limits you. It limits your understanding of the role that messages themselves play. So this is a very subtle point. Messages are the main thing I'm interested in. It's not where you should start. To get to the main thing you're interested in, you've got to start elsewhere to really understand messages. As I said, I think if you're interested in commercial media, then you have to understand the messages are just a tool for the media to produce the actual commodity that is the real center of their activities. Now, there's a lot of talk about the media industry, and I think we should take that talk seriously. If the media is an industry, what does it produce? How does it produce it? How is money made? And if you were to look at the American media system, right, if you're interested in the shoe business, right, that's what I ask. Well, where are shoes made? How are they made? Under what conditions? How is profit made within this? What are workers like? You would understand that you would have an industrial approach to the shoe industry, and I think you should have an industrial approach to what is an industry. And if you did that, then we would actually come up with some very interesting findings. And I know I ask you to bear with me because I'm going to say some really strange things in the next 20 minutes, but I hope to be able to back them up. To understand messages, I think actually we need to follow the advice of, have people seen the film All the President's Men? It's a film about the Watergate scandal, and it's about the two reporters, Bernstein and Woodward, and they're tracing through the scandal of the Nixon White House, and they're trying to trace through what happened with the Watergate break-in. And there's a very famous scene where they have an informant within the White House, and this informant can't tell them the answers, but he can point them in the right direction. And they meet with him in a parking garage, and he gives them these, obtuse clues as to where to go. And this is one of the clues that he gives them, and I think it's actually the great clue that we should use all the time. He says, when they're running into problems trying to figure out what's happening with the Nixon cover-up, and he says, if you want to understand what's going on, follow the money. Right? Follow the money. The money trail will tell you what's going on. And I actually think it's really good advice. You should always follow the money, especially when it's a system based on money. The money trail will tell you something. If we follow the money trail in television, for example, on commercial television, where does the income from commercial television come from? 100% from advertisers. 100% from advertisers. That's what, when you say commercial television, that's what commercial television means. It means the money is coming from advertisers alone. If you look at radio in the United States, the figure is, again, 100%, close to it, perhaps 99.999%. There's something called public radio, which is this little blip that is being taken over more and more by advertisers, but almost 100%. If you look at newspapers, newspaper income is 80% from advertisers, and is the reason why newspapers have been disappearing at a very, very fast rate within the United States. And there are many newspapers, there are many towns, many cities in the United States now. 80% of American cities have only one newspaper. Compared to other cities around the world, that is, I mean, it's stunning that a society that is steeped in information, that communities should only have one newspaper. Radio is the same. Radio is going the same way in the United States. There is less and less choice in radio. Again, it's connected to advertising. In the magazine industry, the figure is somewhere between 50 to 80%. The movies used to be outside of the sphere of advertising. Now, because of product placements and marketing tie-ins, global movies are now nothing more than a parade of products in films. Never used to be like that. It's moving into music. More and more music is simply whether it's jingles or whether products are actually moving into music videos and into music itself. Increasingly, advertising is moving into schools, and I can't think of a place anymore where there is a place that's free of advertising influence. At least in the United States. I think this is a growing global phenomenon. And I think around in countries around the world, it'll be experienced differently, but it'll be a class aspect to it. The promise of the internet has been sucked into this system. Okay, there was in the video that was shown, there was a question about Facebook. I always ask my students this question. Normally they're on Facebook in my class, and but you said, you're on Facebook, 50 hours a day or whatever, if it was possible. If it was possible, they'd be on 50 hours a day. Where does Facebook get its money from? Like, when you open a Facebook account, do you have to pay money? But Facebook just sold for, when it had its offering, what was it, $150 billion? Or, right? Facebook is about making money. Where is Facebook's money? Where is it as a business model? Where is it coming from? Right? There's only one, it's advertising. Facebook is the greatest advertising delivery system the world has ever known. Advertisers have desperately wanted to have an advertising system that was one-to-one, where you can talk to someone as an individual. Not as a member of a group, not as like here is a program that has a male viewership. Here's a program that has a female viewership. Here's a program that has a youth male viewership. Right? Advertisers don't want that. Advertisers want to be able to reach one person at one time. Facebook is their dream. It's a wet dream come true. And because of that, it is worth $150 billion or even more. Again, when we think about social media, I think about social media not from the perspective of the messages, which is where we've come from. Again, I think it's I don't want to discount that. I think social media, my own perspective on social media is, I think, and political change, I think social media is a great organizing tool. It is not a tool to disseminate information, because normally you only go places where you already agree. And so the expansion of knowledge is actually very little, I think, in social media. But you can organize people who already think like you do, already are drawn to that. So you can organize well, which is why you can organize demonstrations very quickly, which is why you can organize meetings very quickly. You can get things out to people in a small network very easily. But let's not kid ourselves. It is not a substitute for the media of mass dissemination like television. Television is going to be the main media for mass dissemination for a long time to come. And we shouldn't be distracted by what social media actually can do. YouTube is the same. You go to YouTube now, right? Remember that's the way they hooked you in. They hooked you in for free first. First few years, you go into YouTube, no ads. You wanted to see a video, that's what you saw. Do it now. You go to YouTube, right? And nowadays, it's even worse than television because you can't click to something else. Right? You have to sit there and watch this thing because it's in real time. That's one of the great things about. That's what that's what YouTube was always going to be about. How can we hook them in and then they can't go away? They can't switch to something else. They can't go to another channel. They have to stay here, and they have to watch this ad. Why? Because most of the time we hate advertising. And so they have to hook us in that way. YouTube, Facebook, whatever. So advertising now is moving into every nook and cranny of the culture, and it's taking over more and more, and it's becoming the dynamic that drives now how our media are organized. In one sense, have people seen the film The Matrix? I actually always use I use this clip in my opening class every time I teach these days because advertising is the matrix. Advertising is the matrix, and the function of media literacy or media education is what Morpheus says here to Neo.
Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. Do you know what I'm talking about?
The Matrix.
Do you want to know what it is? The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
What truth?
That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind. Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Media education is the red pill. That should be our function, because in fact it's one of the major problems of I think of education, of doing education around media, especially with young people, is actually they think they know all there is to know about media anyway. They're trying to convince young people, especially because they've been immersed in this media, they think they know everything already, and they actually have a cynical attitude towards media, and therefore they don't think they need to know anything else. They're so in the matrix, they can't see outside of it, and so You have to get people, as Marshall McLuhan said, the famous quote that's attributed to McLuhan, we're not too sure who discovered water, but we're pretty sure it wasn't the fish. Well, we have to get the fish to see the water when they think they see it already, because they have this kind of cynicism built in. Advertising, moving into every nook and cranny of the culture, and I think is a central dynamic logic matrix of the culture. And if you want to understand messages, messages have a role to play in this matrix. But you've got to start off with understanding the logic that drives messages. When it comes to, and this involves, I think, this involves a fairly dramatic shifting of how we think about how television and how media work. Because if we're not being sold messages, what is the central thing that's being sold in media? Well, the central thing is audience consciousness. Right? When an advertiser is willing to pay however much they're willing to pay, what are they getting for that? Well, they're getting guaranteed the attention of the audience. They're getting the consciousness of that audience. Right? Play this mind game with me for a second. If on one evening, the entire audience decided not to tune into a particular show, what would happen to, would Pepsi be willing to pay $50,000? No, of course not. That is our activity. Our activity is absolutely central. There is this notion that we are kind of couch potatoes. The messages are going into us. It's actually the wrong image. It's absolutely the wrong image. It's not about what goes into us, it's about what comes out of us, what is taken out of us. Commercial media are in the consciousness selling business. They're not in the message making business, they're not in the message distribution business, they are in the consciousness selling business in which messages play a role. This is the kind of the theoretical conclusion or the theoretical implication of this. And I said it's turned it around so that the commercial media system is not defined by what it puts into us, but by what it takes out of us. The first, if we think about our media system as what it puts into us, that's the message-centered approach. And certainly, I said, messages have a role to play in this, but it's not what is central to the system. The system, in fact, is built on something very different. Actually, there's another clip I play when I teach. This is, are people familiar with Harry Potter? Who are the creatures that suck your soul out? Dementors, right? Think of television as dementors. We have the lights back on. Yeah, that's television. Not about putting things in, but about sucking things out. Not about what it puts into us, but what it takes out of us. Once you start thinking that way, then actually messages are really, of course, messages have a role to play within it. But you can't get to that from the message. You've got to get to it from the logic of the system. You've got to step back from messages and to insert messages into this broader structure. And then say, what role do messages play within it? What role do messages play? Well, if it wasn't for messages, we wouldn't watch television. If it wasn't for programs, we wouldn't watch television. And the role of messages then is, I have a more elaborate argument, which I'll give you a reference to. If you're interested, you can talk to me, which is that we actually are the workers of television. But when we're in our living rooms, we're thinking we're watching television, we're actually being put to work by the media industry. The customers are advertisers, we're the workers, the media are the employers. What are programs? Programs are our wage. If there's no wage, we wouldn't watch. So rather than thinking about media as a time of consumption, think about media as a time of production and what role messages play within that. That's an argument that this is I have a much more, I most probably have not convinced you about this, but I do have a very specific way where I can show you exactly how the television audience does exactly the same thing that a factory audience does in terms of how value is drawn out of us. But I'll save you that. The major argument I want to make, though, in terms of is not starting with messages, is starting with the system. And starting with the industrial system, and then, as I said, within the United States, that's how I would start. In another context, perhaps you want to start with the political system, or whatever else it is that media are part of. Then I think it will tell you something much deeper than simply looking at messages themselves. The other reason why we need to study, why I would say you need to start with the logic of the system is, it's the only way you can identify absences. What's not there. And, if you start off with messages are about what's there. What's the content? But what about the stuff that's not there that is systematically excluded out? You can only get to that from an analysis or from the logic of the system. Again, that Jad mentioned this morning, why the middle-class families are abundant on television. Working-class families are not. Why not? Well, because why are the lifestyles of the majority of the world's population not shown, not represented as though they are normal on television? Because it doesn't fit into the system. And so if you want to talk about, you can only talk about absences. In fact, I think actually this is, if you want to talk about power, how power operates by what you leave out, not what you include in. What you include in, but if you can leave things off the table, so the things never get discussed, audiences never have to interact with them, then in fact you don't have to. Let me give you more. I'll talk about this on Friday. Within American media, why can Palestinians not be presented in a sympathetic way? That's an impossibility within the American media system, and the only way to understand that is not to talk about individual journalists, or the only way to talk about that is to talk about the system that produces news about Israel and Palestine, and to talk about public relations, and to talk about the control of that which allows only certain things through and keeps the vast majority out. Again, messages take us to what's there. I really want to talk about what's not there, because that's the way power operates, and you can only get there from, as I said, from an analysis of the logic of the system. Now, within parts of the media, actually, let me move on to that. If you accept this idea that audiences are working when we're in our living rooms, actually, I think we're working the same way we work for wages, then it becomes a really interesting question when we think of children as the workforce. And for very good reasons, there are child labor laws around the world that says, children should not be put to work in factories. There are no child labor laws when it comes to the factory of the living room. And in fact, corporations now target children, babies, as young as 6 months old. The moment that they can distinguish between different brands is when their consciousness becomes something that can be put to work. At that point, we're talking about a system of child abuse that is actually really frightening once you start thinking about it in that way. Now, in many parts of the media literacy community, there are debates around this. What I would be labeled as a protectionist, because there is a large part of that, especially I would say in the United States and in Britain, that actually when they're talking about media literacy, a lot of the focus is on how active audiences are and how much media work for audiences. And the perspective that I've laid out is what's called, it's called pejoratively actually, it's called in an insulting way, it's called the protectionist perspective. I would take that actually. As long as I can call the other perspective, the perspective from the viewpoint of enablers and people who are complicit in letting the system go on, I'm not really interested in name calling, but that's what. And I think actually we need protection, and the protection we need is knowledge. The protection we need is knowledge about how the system works. That is what will. When I show the Matrix clip in my classes, actually I would encourage you to think about it in your own classes. It's a very effective way to get students on board. I have students who coming out of the class and they're talking to each other. I'm going to take the red pill, and then they're on board then with we're now going to deconstruct this entire system throughout the semester. And what you need is protection, and knowledge is protection. Knowledge is protection, which is why corporations are moving into the media literacy business. Why corporations want to do media literacy themselves, and the kind of media literacy that they will do will be, well, you can imagine what kind of education corporations would like to have, or like you to have, or like students to have around media literacy. What we need to do, the perspective I've just laid out, as I said, it's unusual. I think it's a minority perspective within the media literacy field. But I think we should listen to Noam Chomsky when he says, talking about how, and he's not talking here about advertising in particular, he's just talking here about how media is organized in general around political and social issues. He says, quote, citizens of the democratic societies should undertake a course of intellectual self-defense. That's actually what it is, intellectual self-defense, to protect themselves from manipulation and control and to lay the basis for meaningful democracy. And again, it's that last part that I think is really important. It's not just that, we need to know what we're doing, but it's in fact, if you want to have meaningful democracy, meaningful change, then you've got to have a citizenry that really knows what's going on as a prerequisite to real political change and to real meaningful democracy. There are a number. Let me just. I'll finish in the next 15 minutes, and I will leave us 15 minutes for questions. I'm sure you have. Where does media education take place? Again, the normal place where media education has been framed or talked about is the classroom. Is the university classroom, is high school classrooms, middle school classrooms, etc. And I think I think it's easy to do it. I think it's much easier to do it at the university setting because there's more autonomy. I think it becomes much harder to think about high schools because there are broader issues involved in how curriculums are created and controlled, etc. But there are a wide range of places, I think, where media education can take place. And I just want to highlight three things beyond the academy. There's a lot of academics here, and I actually think the academy is a great place to do media education. because that's where students are. And students are not academics. Students are students. And that's a great place to be able to reach. I think the danger of academics is when we don't take teaching seriously, when we think that the major people we should be speaking to are our colleagues, and that we can speak in specialized ways to our colleagues. I think, then that's what careers are based upon. That's how we get tenure, by showing how we can speak in clever ways and really, jargonistic ways with other people, with other colleagues. I wish there was much more focus on teaching. I think actually the public is not out there. The public is sitting in our classrooms, and it's a great opportunity for us to be able to be able to engage with people. But I'll finish with three examples beyond the academy of organizations. Actually, the first one doesn't seem as though it is, but it is. The first one is my organization, the Media Education Foundation. We make films around, there are catalogs actually out there on the table. I didn't bring enough for everyone, but there are 20 of these catalogs, so please share them around. Actually, and you have a special deal. These DVDs actually normally cost quite a lot of money because they go to universities, but they're on special offer to people at the Institute for $20 each, and you have to use this special code to get to it. So there should be copies of the front page, enough for everyone out there. But I look through this, and I encourage you, if you're interested, to make use of this offer. But the Media Education Foundation, we make films, we distribute them. They've become used in thousands of classrooms across the country, in the United States in particular, but they're increasingly used in other parts of the world as well. And I think the major introduction for American students, I think, in the last 14 years to the work of Edward Said was a film we did called On Orientalism, which was an interview with Said, which was a kind of introduction to, Orientalism is a very difficult book to pick up and just, becomes much easier when you've got a little bit of background. And so that was our function, was to how can we get students to engage with difficult material with a new kind of introduction, with a different kind of introduction. And so Said's work we did a film with Said, we've done work with Chomsky, we've done work with Stuart Hall, as being some of the major introductions of these people's work in the US. I also want to draw attention to this organization, FAIR. It's a fantastic organization. They've been in operation about, I think they just celebrated their 25th anniversary, perhaps a little bit more. Called Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. They're based in the United States. They were set up founded by Jeff Cohen, and they monitor the media. They monitor media for how they're reporting various kinds of stories, and they do really top-level research. Really top-level research. They count stories. They do the boring work of researchers, just sitting down and going through and counting things and laying out exactly. For example, they've done this with the conflict that's going on right now in terms of the Israeli-Palestine, in terms of Gaza, in terms of, well, how are Americans hearing about this? Who are the spokespeople that appear on NBC, on CBS, on ABC? How many Israeli spokespeople are there? How many people representing Israeli viewpoints are there, versus how many are there that are neutral, versus how many are there that represent a Palestinian point of view, etc. And the great thing about FAIR is they have numbers. They do research, and they provide these numbers, and they provide them really, really quickly. But they're doing essentially media education. That's what they're doing. They're doing media education. They're helping us, and they're deconstructing it actually as things are actually happening. And for them, it's become much easier in the digital age, because they can get this information out very quickly online. And the last organization I would like to mention it's called the MLP. It's the Media Literacy Project, and they're based in Albuquerque, in New Mexico. Again, they've been around for a long time. They've been around for, I think 20 years or so. And they've, in the last few years, they've actually changed their focus a little bit and become much more activist-based. And they're a really important part of what we can consider, what in the United States is considered the media justice movement, and especially the role of race within media issues. Again, I would highly recommend their work. I'll show you a couple of things to finish with this. Within the United States, I'll be interested to know if this debate is going on in other parts of the world. Within the United States, the major debate going on right now around media issues and around digital issues is what's called net neutrality. And it's essentially, will there be a two-tier system on the internet? A fast system essentially for corporations who can pay for it, and a slower system for the rest of us. And it's a way of, again, imposing the logic of advertising onto this system that should remain free. And this debate has been going on now for 4 or 5 years. This was about 4 years ago. Verizon produced this ad. At the same time that Verizon, as one of the major corporations involved in this, is trying to shut down kind of free access to the media, free and open access by having this two-tier system. They put out an ad like this, which is saying exactly the opposite.
Air has no prejudice.
It does not carry the opinions of a man faster than those of a woman.
Does not filter out an idea
because I'm 16
and not 30.
Air is unaware if I'm black
or white, and wouldn't care if it knew.
So it stands to reason my ideas will be powerful
If they are wise, infectious, if they are worthy.
if my thoughts have flawless delivery. I can lead the army that will follow.
rule the air. Verizon.
Which is interesting. That was called Rule the Air. Who's going to rule the air is the... At the same time that Verizon is putting that out, they're also got thousands of lobbyists in Congress actually arguing the exact opposite about not being a free internet. The Media Literacy Project, they're a small organization in New Mexico led by Andrea Quijada, put out their own ad in response to this. It is unfortunately, whereas the Verizon ad was most probably seen by millions, the MLP ad most probably was not seen by that many people, but it got out there online. This is their response. Sorry, what is it?
Air has no ownership.
With a free and open internet,
We have the same opportunities online as anyone else.
Without discrimination.
I can stay connected.
To my culture, friends,
and family, even when I'm far away.
I can finish my homework at home.
and turn it in on time.
My community can tell its own stories.
No matter how much we make,
Who we are,
Or what we believe in.
With the free and open internet,
We don't need any company's approval to speak.
We are 19 million strong online.
Desde Nuevo México
To New York.
estamos unidos.
when we stand up,
We make history.
El aire.
¿Y el internet?
no se vende, se defiende.
Lidera el aire.
Unite Latinos for internet freedom.
And so there are many different places where media education can take place, not just in the academy. As I said, what I really try to highlight. Actually, can we bring up the lights a little bit? Well, there are choices to be made. There are choices to be made as to how we proceed with our work. And I would say at this, we have a limited amount of intellectual capacity. There's a limited amount of intellectual energy that we have as individuals, and so we have to make choices about where we're going to expend that. In what direction we're going to expend it, for what purpose are we going to expend that kind of energy. And I think actually at the moment where we have, those specific, that we have limited energy, and then where do we put it? At this point in human history, We actually are, I think it's unfortunate, I'm never quite sure what, but we are living at a unique period in human history, in which we are making, with climate change and peak oil, and ocean destruction and economic collapse, our whole planet is on the verge of collapse unless we do something, unless we understand the world differently. And so I think we actually are at and we live within a commercial media system that prevents us from really understanding what is happening. The commercial media system, in this sense, is they are. I sometimes use strong language. They are enemies. They are the enemy that has to be fought. They don't have to be fought with weapons. They have to be fought with knowledge. They have to be fought with the very thing that they want to deny. As I said, and we have to think. Most of us in this room would regard ourselves as engaged in intellectual work. We are intellectuals, and we have to think about the responsibility of intellectuals and what comes with access to privileged resources. I sometimes have to pinch myself that I get paid to do what I do, because I think it's an incredible privilege to be able to do the kind of work that I do. And I think if it's a privilege, then with that privilege comes responsibility, and the responsibility is in which direction are you going to use that work. I'll end with the words of Stuart Hall. I think our responsibility is, as intellectuals, is what Hall says. Stuart Hall says the work of intellectuals. He's talking about Gramsci actually, and Gramsci and intellectuals that many of us like to think of ourselves as. And he says intellectuals have two functions. Firstly, we have to understand the world better than anyone else. And we can't let dogma, we can't let jargon, we can't let old ways of thinking impact how we're going to understand the world. The world is changing, and we have to be able to understand the world the world is changing better than anyone else. That's on the one hand. That's knowledge production. And sometimes knowledge production requires specialized language. Sometimes it requires that we can only speak to 6 other people in the world. Right? That's knowledge production requires specialized skills. However, secondly, and I think the problem is academics sometimes stop there and say, once we've written our articles for the 6 other people that read this journal, that we've done our work. Well, Hall says we've got to do more than that. We have to be able to translate what we have produced into a language, into a form where non-specialists can understand it, so that ordinary citizens can engage with the knowledge that has been produced. And you have to break that link between the academy and the outside, well, it's not the outside, it's between where knowledge production takes place and where it matters. And unless you do that, unless you can, and that notion of translation is really important. It's not just a matter of we can just say what we have to think about how we're going to speak in a public idiom. We have to think about how we're going to translate our work so that people who are not experts in it can understand. And that takes great thought. But the Media Education Foundation, that's one of the things we try and do. Actually, it's a little joke. It's not really a joke because it's actually true. We have an audience in our mind when we think of making our films, and actually, it's the audience I have in my mind when I teach as well. And if it was a room like this, if I was teaching an undergraduate class in the United States, I think there's normally someone sitting in the back row, not here, of course, but in it's normally a man. He doesn't really want to be there, belongs to one of the fraternities or plays a football player, or he sits there, he's got his baseball cap on, he's checking his Facebook page, and and he's there, he's not really paying attention. And I think the role of education actually is to reach into that back row and to get him to put his computer down for a second and to say, this looks interesting. This actually has something to say to me. But that requires work. I also want to speak to the people in the front row. People in the front row for a reason. I want to speak to people in the middle. I want to be able to speak to everyone. And I think and to do that requires really thinking about teaching and really having a strategy about how to reach not just the good, keen students, but to reach other students as well. And that's Hall's function. That's what Hall says. If you want to be a public intellectual, again, there's a great deal of focus on public intellectuals. It's not about being the most famous. It's about being able to speak beyond the professional idiom and to be able to speak in another realm. And as I said, I think we actually are at a unique period in human history where that is our responsibility that we should take seriously. Okay, thanks. We have 15 minutes, so lots of time for questions. We go.
Hi, my name is Omar. We're talking about the cycle for the media. I think we have something should be added. It's about feedback, because when they finish, the readers and yes. So in the lived culture, we need to know feedback, then return back to the production, to people product anything, should be know what happened in the community.
So, I mean, I think this has that built into it. It's the part from readers into lived cultures and then back into production.
Well, the feedback, it's important, I think, it's to know what's happening. Yeah?
I mean, yes, and and for what purpose? I mean, I think in terms of media like to have feedback. Are things working? Are things, and if things are not working, they can make adjustments. This is less about, so that's the media part of it, right? And so media do research. They will produce messages that then go out, and then they'll do research on whether and how those messages have been understood or not understood, and then how do we then need to make changes to our message. This is about a broader structure. This is about how those messages are read, and then how those messages then go into the everyday lived cultures that people have, and then how that then gets taken back up into production. So this is a more general feedback.
Good morning. I have actually two questions. The first question has to do with your view on the media when you're saying that trace the money and so on and so forth. The problem with this, my criticism of this, is that you're viewing the media as separate from society itself. It sort of seems like, well, more or less like a conspiracy. But what I'm trying to say is, isn't it part of our human nature? Isn't advertising and making money and viewing and idealizing the middle class or the rich class or whatever, isn't that part of human nature? Isn't that how we function? I mean, of course, it should be moralized. It should be there should be ethics involved in it. But isn't it part of our nature? That's the first part. The second part has to do with the unique period of human history. Wouldn't you say that right now there are more participants in the media than there ever was? Like, for example, back in the 20s or the 40s or whatever, the only access you had was through the pamphlets or through the newspapers that were delivered to you. Right now you have a chance to participate, so the times are actually better.
Okay, let me go to the first one. Is it part of human nature? No. I think what advertising does, I mean, I'll talk more about this on Wednesday because I'm doing a whole lecture on advertising. But I think advertising actually gives a very specific, tells a very specific story that I think actually is a false story. And the story that it tells, that almost every single ad tells us, is that a product will make you happy. That the purchase of a product, and the more products, the better. And that is a fundamental lie. When you look at when you ask human beings, when you actually look to see what human beings actually actually value. So I don't think it's human nature. I think it's attempt. I mean, I think there was an attempt to say it's human nature. I don't think capitalism is human nature. I think capitalism is a stage in the development of, and I think the great, this is what, Marx thought that capitalism was a necessary stage in the development of democratic socialism. That in fact it was absolutely necessary to destroy the remnants of feudalism and to have individual rights, etc. But that at some point capitalism would not be able to continue and would reach its fetters, and you'd have to have something new. Right? The worry now is that, of course, that I think Marx actually was way too optimistic about what capitalism do. And what capitalism is now doing is we are in the process of this. Capitalism could be the end of the world. And I'm not too sure I'm not sure what will happen later on if, in fact, we no longer have a planet, if we no longer have fish in the oceans. There's a fantastic film, we didn't make it, there's a fantastic film called The End of the Line, and it's the most frightening film I've seen. And it's about how in the lifetime of actually, most probably not in my lifetime, but the lifetime of most of you, most of the fish will be gone in the oceans. And they'll be gone because we'll have eaten them. Because of overfishing, because of industrial capitalist fishing that has destroyed the ecosystem. So I think actually, capitalism is not, it's part of a stage of human development. And my worry is that it's going to become the last stage, and that there is no room in the future. So I guess for the first question, I'd always do away with, I think if I was to talk about human nature in any way, I would say, let's look at human nature and what is it that people really want out of life? And when you ask that, it's relatively consistent around the world. People want good family life. They want to have autonomy in their lives. They want to be able to have attention-free leisure time. They want to have intimate relationships. None of those things are connected. And I think actually that's what human beings are social. What drives us forward is connection, is human connection. And is not connection with products. And what advertising tries to tell us is somehow that it's our relationship to products that's most important. So I don't think it's human nature. I think it's a very constructed form that takes place right now. If it was human nature, I think our human nature is the opposite of what the way capitalism presents it. Capitalism presents it that human nature is about our individual needs and desires and about rational individuals, and it's never been about that. It's always been about connection. That if there is any such thing as human nature, it's about human nature, it's about humans as being social, and that's actually what's being destroyed. The second question, participation in the media, more people, I'm presuming you're talking about social media.
Not only social media, even when it comes to TV. Like right now the impact of the viewership is much higher than it was before. You can actually you can know the ratings, you have more options, so on and so forth.
So the impact of the viewers, the impact of the ratings is much higher than it was before because you have more options, you have more competition.
Google will only send us to the places that are similar to that, not the places that are different. So I think actually, and the reason for that again, I think, is advertising. Advertising wants to have these very targeted audiences, and so it's driving us actually apart rather than driving us, rather than making us, part of one community. Again, it's not just media that's doing that. That's a function of capitalist development as a whole. There's another, I keep referring to these books. There's a book by Robert Putnam called Bowling Alone, which is about the destruction of civic life and community life under capitalism as it goes through. It's one of the natural things of capitalism as a system is it destroys social life. The book is called Bowling Alone, and it's about 10-pin bowling. And he looks at an American context, and he says the same number of people are bowling in America, it's a leisure time activity. The same number of people are bowling now as they used to bowl. Except in the 50s, they used to do it together. They used to have teams, and now they're doing it alone. They go to the lanes alone and they play alone, or they play with one other person. And what's being destroyed is the activity, in one sense, is the same. What's being destroyed is the social framework around it. So, I think we have to think about participation in much more specific ways, and what's being destroyed and what's being gained.
Hi. My question might be a bit too general, but when you talked about the working class and how the majority of the society is being excluded from the media, how does that affect how we perceive ourselves when we're watching something, like all the time, watching something that's not ourselves, apart from the fact that it would probably push us to try to be that person?
Yeah, again, I'll talk a little bit more about this on Wednesday. But the major effect of this, I mean, again, we have to come back, like why are middle-class families shown so much on American sitcoms? I mean, if you look at American sitcom, you'd think it was like, the average family was really rich. They earned about $150,000. They lived in these spacious houses, and they had no problems. And it's because the world of programming can't be at odds with the world of advertising, and therefore they kind of have to look the same. If the programming was all about, and at one time actually American programming in the 1950s actually did feature working class life. And advertisers hated it, and therefore the working class was banished from television. And therefore, there's a reason why we see what we see. But one of the major impacts of that, sorry, I'll mention just yet another book. There's a book by Juliet Shaw called The Overspent American. And again, one of the impacts, what happens is that when middle class life comes to be seen as normal, when normal is, then it's not surprising that we want to start wanting that life. And if that life involves these kinds of products, and then you will go into tremendous amounts of debt to get, and so American society at the moment is one of the ways it's going to fall apart is in terms of personal debt. And the reason the personal debt has reached such a high is that we used to aspire to the people who lived in the next street. We now, instead of aspiring to our friends in the next street, we now aspire to our friends on television. And if our friends on television live like this, well, that must mean that's what normal is. And people have gone into tremendous amounts of debt. And so it destroys, and I think it was a broader question, when you don't see yourself represented, of course there is no way in which working class life can be reproduced in the forms it should be, because representation is so key to how communities are constructed. And so I think working class life itself starts to then fall apart, starts to become much more individualized, as we don't see, as the majority of people don't see themselves represented. I think you could use the same way, what happens when minorities do not see themselves represented. They don't see themselves represented in the full dimensions that you find in reality. Well, you start to think of yourself, you start to think of your own identity.
أهلا نجاح من العراق. تكلمت عن الإعلانات، تحدثت عن الإعلانات وكيفية استخدامها للجمهور. يعني اتضح لي أنه هي جزء من مفهوم أوسع اللي هو عولمة الإعلامية. فهل من الضروري إحنا نضع برامج نوعي الجمهور ماهية العولمة الإعلامية وخاصة بالمجتمعات العربية اللي هي واحدة من سماتها أنه الترويج للثقافة الاستهلاكية.
Sorry, could you say that again? I didn't quite get one.
هل من الضروري أن نضع برامج وأسس نوعي الجمهور بالمجتمع العربي عن العولمة الإعلامية اللي هي أحد سماتها ترويج الثقافة الاستهلاكية؟
Yes. But again, I think this is very specific, right? I mean, which is why I wanted to focus on the specificity and how things will be different in different contexts. Now, sorry, you said you were from Iran, right? Iraq, right? I mean, I think this question is to think about, okay, what is the specificity of Iraq at this time? And how important is consumerism and, to the situation we find ourselves, that you find yourself in there? If it is important, if consumerism, yes, then absolutely you will need, you need to have education programs that raise awareness or, that can get people to think about that in a deeper way. I'm just not sure that I'm not aware that that's a situation. Or is the media situation and the cultural situation in Iraq different? That a different focus is what's necessary at this point, rather than consumerism. I think that's a much more specific thing about what's important right now in your own context.
Okay. In this framework, if we want to break it down or to see it from a demand and supply side, would media be the supplier and the readers would be the people or the stakeholder or the entity demanding information or content, whatever? And if we can see it from this perspective, demand and supply, who would be the moderator, arbitrage, to adjust any gap between the two, regardless if it's good or bad?
Well, I think if you were to look at it that way, then you'd have to, certainly advertising would not be that, this would not be the system for supply and demand. Because within this, advertisers, the interests of the audience count for nothing within this. Because all that's required of the audience within this is that we watch television. And then our consciousness is sold. So we are only the products. The buyers are advertisers, so their interests are represented. The owners are corporations, so their interests are represented. So it's not surprising within this system that I described that the interests of the buyers and the interests of the sellers will be what dominate, and that the interests of the product is not taken into account. Now, if you wanted to change that, then you'd have to think about, okay, what are the democratic structures that would allow different voices to be different kinds of discourses and different kinds of stories that are relevant to the public around issues of culture and politics. How can you get those across when that's the aim, rather than going through the mediation of advertising? And that's they have to think about public media in a different way. You have to think about how do you set up democratic structures that allow different voices and different stories. I think the major thing is not that consumers, not that the audience needs one story. I think the major thing about media that I would focus on is how do we get different stories? Is what we need is diversity of opinion, and how then do we set up a system whereby you can get different views? I think what we have right now is one dimension, you have one view. If you wanted a system where you have different views, then you'd have to set up a democratic structure of access to that.
في النموذج الهرمي للاتصال كنا نركز على تأثير وسيلة الإعلام، لكن الآن مع مشاركة الجمهور في مواقع التواصل الاجتماعي وتوسع هذه المشاركة مثل الفيسبوك، تويتر، اليوتيوب، أصبح الآن النموذج الخطي. طيب مع النموذج الخطي أصبح هنا تعرض المشاهد أو المستمع أو الجمهور بشكل عام أكبر لوسائل الإعلام. طيب أنا هنا في هذه الحالة هل التربية الإعلامية بتساعدني أو التعليم الإعلامي سيساعدني في أني أجعل من هذا الجمهور منتج جيد للرسالة، أم سيصبح هكذا فقط مجرد مستهلك ومستهلك سلبي أيضا خصوصا مع زيادة التعرض؟
I would hope that with more knowledge and with awareness of the situation in which people are located, that it will make them more aware and therefore more, that it will be positive as a way of being in the world. Again, I think it's to do with, I mean, you started off by saying, you know, we used to talk about media, now we talk about audiences. I actually think to talk about audiences properly, we need to go back to talking about media and to talk about the framework within which audiences make meaning and within which audiences are able to understand the world. Audiences can only do, I mean, there's a famous quote by Marx where he says, people make their own history. That is, audiences are active in what they do. We are creative, but not in conditions of their own choosing. That is, there are limits to the range of our freedoms. And so what I would want to focus on is less on what the audience can do and more on providing the context that allows the audience to understand things and to express themselves in the broadest way. And that will require struggling over the nature of our media structures.
My question is here about cinema, because you have mentioned that movies are also controlled by advertising. Actually, cinema used to be different than television regarding this all over the years, because the filmmaker used to try to convey a message and his vision about the culture and the society via his movie. And I know that advertising is now controlling in product replacement, for example. But shouldn't we distinguish between making a movie just for the advertising or for advertising sake or for marketing, and making a movie or using the advertising to increase my budget in order to be able to convey the message or the vision I want? I think cinema is different than television in this, because cinema, the start or the starting point from making a movie is to convey the message, not to get profit from it. I mean the art films, not of course the commercial films. What do you think about this?
Well, it would always depend upon when advertising money comes to you, what are the strings that are attached to it, right? Something that doesn't often just come with, okay, here is, and we need our product in the film, and if we're going to give you this, it needs to be in the visuals. If we give you this, it needs to be in the dialogue. If we give you this, it needs to be in the narrative. Right? So it depends how it comes. I mean, it's like all of these. It's like, you know, resources. Are resources given without any return, or does it always come with something? Now, I understand. I mean, believe me, I understand if you're an independent filmmaker and you have, you know, very little budget, and Pepsi-Cola comes along and says, here is $50,000, and we need you to put this product in this thing. You know, it's very tempting to do it. The question is, how does that change things? How does that, does it change things, or you just have, I mean, again, whenever you see a product in a film, right? It has to be faced the right way. It has to be faced out so you can see the label. So that even that independent film comes to be shot, that particular shot, is then done as an advertisement. Does it change the, I mean, I think those are the things that, that independent filmmakers will think about, okay, I mean, I'm not so pure, right, that says that you can't, right, within the present context, you know, there are certain ways in which money gets raised. And I think the best thing that independent film producers could do in that situation would be to say, well, okay, I'm going to, you know, we can only do the minimum amount. And that any way in which it starts to impact upon the actual narrative of it is, but, I mean, I've seen independent films where it's so clear that they've got the money and, you know, they've set up the shot and you see the shot and you see the Coke can in the foreground and they sometimes mention it during it. And I think that's what independent filmmakers would have to figure out themselves. You know, I have no, I mean, I wouldn't say never, or I think it's, and, you know, at the Media Education Foundation, you know, we raise money from people, and, you know, we think about what that means. We think about what it means for that product, for us to say this, you know, this film was made with the you know, money from so and such. How will that affect then the film itself? Even though it's not going to change our you know, what we're going to say, the fact that it's connected with this name, how does that affect its credibility as we move forward? So I think these are very pragmatic choices.
Thank you very much. ممكن نشكر البروفيسور.